to reiterate what we started with, you will never effectively improve something without ownership.
Where do you feel you are not taking ownership? That's tough, I think, for a lot of people, especially if you have lower self-belief, to look in the mirror and say, wow, I'm not taking ownership here. Conscious couples, business partners, and singles committed to attracting their dream partner. Welcome to the Conscious Couples podcast, where we share our life, love story, and combined relationship expertise to help you create and consistently cultivate the most magnificent, intimate relationship possible.
Never again will you feel hopeless and alone in your intimate relationship challenges.
Having accumulated thousands of hours coaching conscious couples and individuals all over the world, as well as starting and growing a global business together, Alan and I are here to guide you in all things relationships.
Thank you again for tuning into the one place where it's not about you or me, it's about the we. Conscious couples and individuals all over the world, welcome back to the Conscious Couples podcast. We are here for episode number 14. The train is a-rollin'. And this episode is your partner taking ownership? This is a big one. Very, very, very important. Before we jump in, we want to give a huge shout out to the team at Next Level Podcast Solutions for producing this show, YouTube, audio, all of the things. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, love. Ladies first.
So I will start by asking you, Lovey, what would you say your intention for this episode is? I know we haven't done that in former episodes, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand what our intentions are behind the scenes to help them see how we go about doing that and bringing that forward.
So I don't know why we weren't taught this in school. And a lot of what we talk about, we wonder why we were never taught these things. I don't think that kids were taught why ownership is such a good thing. And I've coached people from the NFL and I've coached people from the MLB. And in the MLB in particular, I coached this one individual who in baseball, there's something called errors. And you want to make as minimal errors as possible on the field. An error would be an example of dropping a fly ball.
Right.
But if you have this negative relationship with making quote-unquote errors and being seen as bad, a bad baseball player, a bad person, a bad boyfriend, a bad girlfriend, a bad whatever,
Right.
then you aren't going to take ownership. You're going to try to wish these mistakes away. You're going to try to avoid them. You're going to try to pretend it was everyone else's fault. And sometimes good things happen to bad people. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. And I use those terms very loosely, good and bad. But I think my intention for this episode is to help people understand that it is impossible from my perspective. Improbable. I'll say improbable. It is improbable from my perspective to improve yourself and your life without taking ownership. And so I remember hearing this from Jim Rohn once. He said, what if your aunt changes? What's going to change for you? What if your mom changes? What if your judgmental relatives change? What if the economy changes? And he says, not much. But if you change, if you take ownership for your own career, your own relationship, your own life, ownership's one of my favorite words in the world. It is your responsibility to make the life that you want. And I don't say that from the place of bad things never happen or the economy is not bad at times and times aren't tough. I say it from the frame of when you take responsibility, you give yourself the ability to respond. And if it's everyone else's fault, there's nothing you can do about it. So that's my intention. And I wrote this down. Help listeners understand why ownership is so critical. I think one of the things from past relationships that made me so, I would say, made me get better is I took so much ownership. At times almost too much, but I always came out better. And some of the people that didn't take as much ownership, quite frankly, didn't. And of course not, because if they don't take any ownership for their part in it, what are they're not going to read a book on how to improve before taking ownership. So that's my intention. What's yours, love?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because what just popped into my mind is agency and how that ties to self-belief. So when you can take ownership, I believe there's a direct correlation with your ability to believe in yourself, to have agency over or with whatever is in the realm of your influence. So like you have we have talked about this in former episodes, but what is within your control versus what is completely out of your control versus what is within the realm of your influence.
Yep.
And a lot of people tend to focus on what is out of their control and get worried and have anxiety around that versus really this conversation is around kind of that alternate circle of what is within your control, and not even going to that circle of what's within your influence, but rather what is really in your control. And I believe if you don't have levels of high self-belief, you're likely going to be in that complete opposite realm, that circle of what is not within your control. And you're going to be more concerned about that and pointing the finger outward than you are going to be pointing the finger inward, having that humility and integrity, which we're going to talk about in this episode, to really focus in on what is within your control as a result of what is the agency that you have within your own life. So my intention for this episode is to, like you, really show within relationships where you can have so much value and weave so much in your relationship in terms of value and in terms of trust in particular, when you do and when you shift your attention to what is within your control and how you leverage that in terms of a space of ownership can really make or break a relationship. So I want, in this episode, my intention is to really focus in on the value that ownership can have within the realm of intimate relationships.
Think about it this way too. If you don't believe in your own ability to improve, why would you take ownership? Of course you would avoid it. And so that's really at the root of this is if you do believe in your own abilities and you do have a growth mindset, you're much more likely to take ownership. And the truth of the matter is, and we always want to bring difficult realities, difficult truths to the forefront, is what if you have a partner who deep down does not believe in their own ability to change, to transform, to evolve? One of Emilia's favorite words. If you have a partner who does not believe in their own ability to evolve and transform and change, why would they take ownership? Of course, they're gonna point outward instead of inward.
Right.
Where versus someone who has a deep belief in their own ability to evolve and a desire to do so, of course, they're gonna take more ownership. So I'm excited about this.
Yeah, me too. So there's 3 scenarios and 3 situations which I want to dive into and start this conversation out. And all 3 of them happen to be either former clients or current clients or people that we know within our circles. And we'll obviously keep it anonymous, but I think these avatars of relationships are really important to bring forward in this conversation. So, and actually, as you mentioned, the self-belief, that's really cool to look at it from this frame. So I want to take scenario 1. So this is a couple who's been together, and in each one of these couples, you know, in terms of their relationship, I don't necessarily think that particularly matters in terms of ownership. What I do believe matters is the sense of self-belief, right? So their ability to control and have agency over what is within their control in their relationship. So you have scenario number 1. These individuals, you know, their ownership kind of lies in more of a lack. And when you really peel the layers back, when there is an issue or a challenge in their relationship, oftentimes you'll see the finger pointing at one another that it's their fault. Now, in this type of relationship, both of these individuals, when we kind of look at it from that frame of self-belief, matter of fact, both of them don't necessarily, if we were to peel back the layers, they don't really have high levels of self-belief.
Even though they don't say that.
Even though it's hard for them to admit, and, you know, the subconscious is more running them. There's a lot more lack here. And so when things don't necessarily go their way, there's not a lot of ownership here. And usually there's almost a delusion at why things aren't going the way that they want to. And it just so happens to be all of these other issues that are causing things to happen or not that is impacting their relationship. So like, for example, this couple individual, like I know one of the partners loves to play video games and the other partner is just, they struggle to figure out why this partner isn't taking ownership in terms of how the trajectory of their relationship is going. And you've seen a lot of relationships in this regard where one might be very focused on something that the other partner just doesn't seem to value. And when you start to look at the health of their relationship, you can't help but ask yourself or have them ask themselves of, okay, well, why is your relationship where it is? Like 0 to 10, where do you think it's at? And if that one partner were to respond in more of a negative manner of like, it's a at a 3 of 10. If I think that it could be at a 10, it's at a 3. You'll notice this partner kind of is pointing outward at the other partner. Well, they're playing too much video games. They're doing too much this. They're doing too much that. Whereas there's a great opportunity for this partner to actually point the finger inwardly and say, how can I help to evolve and improve this relationship? Okay. So that's scenario number 1. This is where you have a lack of ownership from both ends and you see the fingers pointing at each other or completely outward. That's very common.
That's the most common, in my opinion, statistically. One thing I want to share a caveat. When you do point that finger inward, that's called leading by example. And your partner might transform and start doing the same thing. What I also have seen happen in some of my clients and in my past as well is that you start pointing the finger at yourself and then they keep pointing the finger at you. That's a dangerous game, and I know you're going to get to that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get to that scenario. Actually, we're going to jump to that next.
Okay.
So this is scenario what I'll refer to number 3. So this is on the opposite end. So if you were to kind of think of this in terms of like a 0 to 10 scale, what we just talked about, scenario number 1 is like the 0 area, right? There's not a lot of ownership on either end of the relationship. Now we're going to jump to the complete opposite spectrum, where this is scenario number 3, where you have an intimate relationship where you have extreme ownership of one partner. And so the finger is pointed inwardly, like you just mentioned, where if I screwed up, like it was me, like the partner is taking claim and laying claim to screw ups or challenges or I guess, if you will, the health of the relationship, when the other partner is not, and the other partner is pointing the finger at that partner who is taking extreme ownership. You have, just like the scenario number 1 that we mentioned, a lot of shame and delusion going on with this ownership scenario, because you have, for example, one very growth-oriented partner who will say and defend the other partner of like, no, they're really into growth. And we see that very often.
All the time.
No, they're really into growth. Oh, they're so into this. They're doing all of this. But when you actually look at their behavior and how much that partner who's actually not doing the work is taking ownership, there's 0 ownership there. And so what actually ends up happening in this scenario is that the one that is taking ownership is often gaslit and led to believe that there is ownership in this relationship, which is very hot water, very dicey, very can be manipulative behavior. And they start to ask themselves, well, why isn't my relationship great? And ends up putting on a huge facade, just like scenario number 1 of our relationship is great. But when you start to peel back the layers, you start to notice that one partner is taking extreme ownership, almost to the extent where it's a detriment because the other partner has 0 responsibility and 0 ownership here. So now that's the extreme opposite end. Now let's look at the middle scenario number 2, which is in the ideal world. Optimal ownership in a relationship. And so this one, shout out to our clients. You might know who you are when we talk about you. But in this scenario number 2, this is the most centered, the most optimal way of taking ownership. And where you see this is where if there's a mess up or if there's a challenge or if there's a screw up, there's no fingers pointing at one another. There's no one person pointing at themselves and then the other partner pointing at that other partner. There is each partner kind of pointing inwardly at themselves and saying, I screwed up. I take ownership for this. In these types of partnerships, you happen to see a lot of humility and vulnerability. We see honesty coming forward proactively, and you see integrity, people wanting to be and stay within integrity within their own standards, not necessarily what their partner projects onto them. And in this centered, optimal ownership capacity scenario number 2, you often see apologies coming far more frequently, often, and the ability to forgive. Whereas if you were to look at 1 or 3, those apologies are so empty and very rarely will come through. And forgiveness, it's really not there. Resentment is actually building.
So on the third scenario, it's when one partner is taking almost all the ownership for the challenges in the relationship. The first scenario is when neither partner is really taking ownership for the challenges and overcoming those challenges and growing from those challenges and improving from those challenges. And the optimal scenario is where one person might be pointing at themselves and taking ownership. The other person's not pointing at all. They might hold up a mirror, but they're not pointing. And maybe they're both pointing at themselves, or one partner's pointing at themselves. The second scenario, the optimal problem here, the optimal stopping problem, for lack of better phrasing, it's a computer science term. You have 0, you have 5, and you have 10. 5 is the optimal amount of ownership. And that's the thing. Are you taking too much ownership in your relationship, and you're constantly putting it yourself and laying blame on yourself for your partner's ineffectiveness? Or are you taking no ownership at all and everything is everyone else's fault? Or are you both pointing at the world and it's the world's fault? And just understand this. What you say, think, feel, do, and believe is all within your control. Everything you don't say, don't think, don't feel, don't do, and don't believe is also within your control. And that is what we have full control over.
A little over a year and a half ago, I attended my first relationship call with Alan and Emilia. And as a single mother, I was very curious what I was actually going to be able to take away from it. I was very blown away with how deep we could actually go in that first session alone. It really opened the doors and opened my eyes to a lot of my patterning and wounding around relationships. Through attending some of their live events and through work with them, I have really grown in confidence, in learning how to love and show up for myself, which has been huge. And it's really set the bar high when in terms of standards for relationships and what I desire and need out of a relationship. They very much practice what they preach, and it's so nice to see people working consciously on relationships. Again, it's really set the bar high for what I look for and what I desire in a relationship. So I'm super grateful to be able to learn and grow from them and be a part of this community.
And so to bring this down to earth for our listeners, let's try to give some tangible examples where you and I have taken ownership. So to try to describe this, we have our mascot of the Conscious Couples podcast, who's currently in the den. His name's Tucker. He's the most adorable little dog ever.
He's not 4 pounds. I mentioned that on the last episode. I want to take ownership.
He's definitely
here.
more than
He's
4.
like 8.7 pounds now, guys. So though he is small, he is mighty.
He went to the vet recently, and that's why you're like, oh my God, he's more than double
he's
what I
not
said.
4 pounds.
I
was lying. I'm sorry.
Not consciously.
No.
Unconsciously podcast. Just joking. Okay, so Tucker rings a bell when he wants to go outside. And he goes out 4 times a day. Yes, we track the data. It's whatever. So we have morning, we have early afternoon, we have afternoon, and we have evening shift. And Emilia and I each take 2 shifts of the 4. So half and half, beautiful thing. We recently started doing our mornings in what we call the nook in the upstairs. So we have 2 floors technically we have 3 floors. The bottom floor is the basement where there's a gym and laundry and all that. The middle floor is for rest and relaxation, R&R, sacred space. And then upstairs is where we do service and work. And that's recent, by the way. We started putting our phones up here and our work up here. So work is upstairs, 3rd floor, and, sacred time is downstairs. In the morning, I have morning shift with Tucker to take him out peas and poops, and that's the official term. Peas and poops. And you go for both. You don't always get both. But anyways, so Tucker, I don't know if he rang the bell this morning or that morning or not, but there was a morning where I was up in the nook doing my back office work to start my day. My day's typically front-facing, starts at 10 a.m. And Tucker had tried to ring the bell. Oh, I know what it was. Okay, so he was in the front door where you typically take him out. I take him out downstairs in the back door.
Right.
And we used to have 2 bells, one on the front door and the back door. Anyways, Tucker didn't ring the bell because there's no bell. Not Tucker's fault.
Right. Totally honest.
And his dad totally was in the zone working, and Tucker was like, okay, Dad, if you're not going to take me out, I'm going to shit right here on the carpet. And so this is...
Mommy comes out.
Yeah. And
realizes
that there
steps on the poopy.
may or may not be a shit on the carpet. Is this an explicit show? I think it is. But anyways, he did poops inside, and I took ownership. That's my shift. That's my bad, sweetheart. I'm sorry. And
Pun intended.
before this episode, we were trying to think of a scenario where we take ownership. I do think we're really good about that, genuinely.
Yeah.
And that was on me. So that scenario of the story is take ownership when your dog shits on the carpet. But no, I wrote this down. The most important lesson, to reiterate what we started with.
Mm-hmm.
You will never effectively improve something without ownership.
Right.
And I'm not saying to go to level 10 and take ownership for things that are quite frankly not your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not Emilia is getting her most important work accomplished is not my responsibility, but I do take the responsibility as her partner to keep the promises that I make. And even if it's something as simple as letting Tucker out in the morning, right? Because now she has to clean up the poop. She's got her meetings that she's got to get to, and I'm over here writing my book, and she has to deal with my ineffectiveness. And so if you're in an intimate relationship, you know it's a team. And you can't be on a team with someone who never takes ownership. And you can't be on a team with someone who's always pointing at you.
Right.
And so my synopsis here really, and the question to ask yourself, I wrote most important question, where have you or your partner not been taking ownership? What's the bug in the garden? Maybe you're playing too many video games and you haven't taken ownership for that and for improving that. Maybe you aren't taking your dog out when you're supposed to. Maybe you're not keeping the promises you make to yourself. Maybe you're not doing the laundry when you say you're going to, or whatever it is.
Right.
These things, these little things, they stack up. And if you can't take ownership for the little things and improve them, how are you going to do that when the big things come up?
So true. And one of the things that you had just mentioned, I want to preface this, like, I feel like you and I have definitely experienced both kind of ranges of, I would say, the levels of ownership in past partners. You and I both have a high level of self-belief. So I do believe that you and I are more centered in that optimal level of taking ownership than former partners in the past.
Same.
And one thing that I just want to touch base on in terms of scenario 2, that is what, like, in terms of self-belief, because that's what we talked about at the beginning, both partners have higher self-belief than scenario 1.
Yeah.
And then scenario 3 is one partner has high self-belief or higher than the other partner. And what you find, the partner that will point at the other is actually the one that has the lower self-belief, and that's how it shows. So to that point, babe, and even in that moment, you and I just talked about this before, like, I have higher reps in the arena of Tucker and his training and his bell. So for me to take that off the door, that was the real issue. Ultimately, I should have known better. And that's not you projecting the standard subconsciously in me. I should have known better. And that's my standard that I should have understood when we were training Tucker. And so we just talked about putting on another bell and taking ownership to that so that we aren't confusing Tucker in his training, but bringing this fully back to the episode in terms of intimate relationships and ownership. I think it is really important to understand what are the expectations that you might be projecting onto your partner in terms of where you want them to take ownership, because oftentimes we'll just revert into that. And oftentimes too, I think it's important to be able to talk about, where do you want more ownership in your relationship? Because you might be coming into a relationship where you had one scenario or the other, and your partner might be coming in with the opposite, right? So I think there's a great opportunity for having this podcast be the springboard to each one of your intimate relationships conversation about ownership, and where do you guys fall in those 3 scenarios, and what might the truth to that be? So the 3 questions that I had for partners to ask themselves after this podcast is, number 1, where do you need ownership the most? What critical moment? Alan and I had experienced after one of our events the other night, where I now understand Alan at such a deeper level than I had before. And I thought I knew, like, here's the thing. You think that you know your partner, and one of the deepest commitments that I have to Alan is to never stop learning him, and vice versa. Like, that's something that we have put the initial from our relationship, is that we'll never stop learning each other because we evolve. And that's the thing. I had thought that I knew that in the moment after that relationship talks, that event that we had, I thought I knew what you needed in that moment. But in reality, I got humbled. And I didn't know that you needed specific ownership to not make you feel like alone in those moments. And so having those challenging conversations about where do you need more ownership, or where do you need it the most as a result of maybe a former relationship and tendencies that your brain is remembering and kind of having alerts go off to. That was a beautiful conversation that you and I were able to have a deeper understanding of one another. So question number 1, where do you need ownership the most? What critical moment for you? Is it when you have screwed up and your partner has screwed up, or what is that? What is that critical moment? Number 2, where do you feel you are not taking ownership? That's tough, I think, for a lot of people, especially if you have lower self-belief, to look in the mirror and say, wow, I'm not taking ownership here. I might have screwed up and I might be completely pointing that finger outwardly. And then number 3, where do you feel your partnership is not taking ownership? Where do you feel as though your partner is not taking ownership? Because those are great conversation starters to not necessarily blame, shame, or guilt your partner, but rather, like I said, Alan and I's experience was to deepen our connection in our intimacy and ultimately our understanding of how we can love, connect, and support with one another in the most challenging times, honestly.
Remember, it is the hardest to take ownership when it is the most important. If it's everyone else's fault or everything else's fault, and you're so used to making excuses, and you're deeply insecure and you don't believe in yourself, it's going to be very hard to say, yeah, that's on me, I'll change. Because deep down you don't believe you can. And so we empathize with that, but at the end of the day, if you have any of that going on where you don't believe in your own ability to improve, it's really not real. You can improve. You can. I don't know about you, sweetheart, but I think all the time. And I also coach so many people, so I'm always figuring out where they're not taking ownership because all the power is in the ownership.
Right.
When you take responsibility for your own health and fitness, guess who gets health and fit? Healthy and fit. So whether it's health and fitness or your intimate relationship or your financial future, if it's everyone else's fault, there's nothing you can do about it. So I digress. Episode 14 is a wrap. Is your partner taking ownership? Episode 15, which is next, is going to be how to set healthy boundaries in your relationship. And that has to do with core values and when you feel like those are not being honored to the extent either by you or your partner or both that you would like. Before we go, as you know, every Saturday we have Service Saturday, and Emilia and I sit down with a conscious couple or individual. We did 2 today, actually, which was really cool.
Oh, they were awesome.
And any conscious couple or individual who wants to learn more and dig deeper on this podcast, we can only, I'm just going to say this. Emilia's Remarkable has notes on notes on notes that are truly magnificent.
Thanks.
And you're welcome, sweetheart. And it's kind of like if we could read you 1/3 of one chapter versus digging into the textbook. And that's what those relationship talks are like. Don't let that scare you away. That's where the real work is done. So please reach out. There's going to be a link in the show notes to book on Emilia and I's calendar for 30 minutes every single Saturday. We leave a 30-minute time slot every Saturday. And I'm just going to say this too. If we're digging deep and we're in flow, we go a little bit over. So we set it for 30 minutes, but we also have some time to go a little extra if we need to. So please book that, and we hope to meet you soon.
Those change lives, everyone. So super grateful for that. Additionally, we want to invite you to our next Relationship Talks event. This one is going to be June 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And what you can look forward to, the topic specifically that we're going to be talking about is relationship insurance, growing together, not apart. I mean, you have car insurance, you have life insurance, you have health insurance, you have you probably even have insurance for your phone and for your
Poopy
devices.
Insurance for
you
Tucker.
might have dog. You probably have pet insurance, right? Like, where is your relationship insurance? And I'm not calling you out here, but rather inviting you to the world of relationship insurance, because ultimately, here's the thing. The work that you put in now is going to pay off tenfold rather than, poopy poopy insurance. Anywho, with that, we invite you to that. Get around other conscious singles and conscious couples. This is a live free virtual event that we host every second Thursday of the month. And it has been so extraordinary to meet so many people and to get around other people that might be struggling in this arena, but who are committed to growing together, not apart. So join us in that event. It will be also in the show notes. So register now before seats fill up, and we cannot wait to see you there.
If you feel on any level like you and your partner are growing apart and you can tell when that's happening, come to this event. It's going to help you because you'll be grateful that you did. We've seen this with couples many, many times where they were growing apart. They've come to us and we've helped them identify why that is. Relationship insurance is really, really important. If you value your partner, if you're in love, love is the most important thing in the world. So we hope to see you there. Thank you so, so much. And as always, it's not about you or me. It's about the we. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Conscious Couples podcast. We love connecting with the Conscious Couples community, so please make sure you follow us on Instagram. I am at Evolve with Emilia, and Alan is a Lazaros 88.
Also, if you or your partner resonated with this episode, leave us a review at the link in the show notes, and please share this with someone you love and care about.
Until next time, remember, it's not about you or me. It's about
the we.